Brandon, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
Really, really good. Such a pleasure to talk to you. As an easy in, what is your favorite scary movie of all time?
To me, that's the hardest inimaginable because I can't, you know what, I at the best of times cannot rank movies, and my mind goes completely blank when I get asked that question. But I'm also just off a plane, so
Let me rephrase that. What's the last great scary movie you saw?
The Damned. It was. I know it's not a traditional horror film, but it is quite horrifying. I don't know. It really was kind of brilliant and got to me.
No, I appreciate that. So, for when you're writing a script for, say, Infinity Pool for any of your movies, I was sitting there and I was watching it, and then afterwards I was trying to picture what that script must have looked like because even watching it requires imagination. So I can only imagine when it's written on the page. You obviously must know what you mean when you're writing the script for it, but is that difficult to maybe to translate or to kind of to get across to your actor? Say this is what the words are on the page, but this is how I imagine it's going to look in the finished movie.
You know what? It's a mix. There are certain things that are specific to the script that do carry over to the film, but for the more visual sequences, the hallucinatory sequences, actually, it's it tends to be a process of exploration that I undertake with a number of collaborators. Kareem Hussein, my cinematographer, and I spent a lot of time experimenting with in-camera camera effects, practical camera effects. Dan Martin, my makeup effects designer, and Zosha McKenzie on this one, who did things like designed these mirror boxes. So we would have a mirror box where one side was two-way glass, so you could shoot in it without getting the camera and the reflection, but the back was smart glass, so you could have a pinwheel of light where it would just have the light come through the glass but not the rig, and so it created this sort of pinwheel effect. And then Kareem and I would rephotograph that in his living room with like gels and lights, and so the thing about that from a script perspective is it's written as a kind of vague paragraph. I'll say there are flashing lights, the image deforms, it's nightmare imagery, whatever. And that's sort of code to my team to say, look, we're going to spend months just like exploring stuff and stumbling onto happy accidents and using practical effects and kind of developing this look through process. So I'm not saying, and then it cuts to one frame of a mask and a pinwheel of light and that kind of stuff. It's really a kind of organic, collaborative process with my team.
I guess it's serendipitous timing in that like there's a huge conversation, especially online at the moment, around sex in movies and television, and how there's a huge push now saying that like sex is almost unnecessary anymore. It's unless it's integral to the plot. Whereas I would say it can be very integral to the mood of a movie. You get a point across quite clearly by letting the audience know there is sex in this movie. So prepare yourself. That's the kind of audience we want for it. But like, do you have an opinion, I guess, on like why there has been not necessarily a turn away from it, but it's funny that in the 90s, one of the biggest genres was erotic thrillers and people would flock to see those huge movies. Whereas lately it's almost seen as being like a fringe part of movies. Like if someone has an explicit in quote mark sex scene in a movie, it's almost seen as being too adult now.
It's interesting you say that because I keep having people approach me saying the adult thriller is back, and everybody. I think we're going to get a wave of adult thriller of these sort of erotic thrillers because I don't know. It's just there's a certain weird behind the scenes buzz in the industry right now that it's about to be the 90s again. I guess the 90s are back in style in terms of music and fashion, and so they're the thought is why not also these sort of erotic thrillers. More broadly though, I mean, I think to see something is different from knowing technically that it happened, and film is a very visual medium. It's a very visceral medium. I don't buy that it's the same thing. I don't. I mean, I think to see something completely changes your mood. It changes, recontextualizes, or contextualizes the next part of the film because it puts you into a particular emotional state. You feel it viscerally, Again, the same with violence. I get that question more with violence is do you have to show the violence? You don't have to, but if you feel on a visceral level what those characters are going through, that really changes your experience of the film from that point on. I mean, personally, I think erotic art can be incredibly beautiful, and it can be incredibly moving, and it can tap into a certain part of our humanity. I mean, sex is so much at the core of who we are, and so if you want to make films about people, you have to explore sex. I don't totally get the argument for not showing it, aside from a sort of discomfort or discomfort around that I guess some people have, but I don't think it's the same thing, certainly.
No, I appreciate that. Well, just one final question, if that's okay. There are a lot of, I found like every 10 minutes, I felt like I was peeling away a new potential definition of what I was watching. There were so many kind of subtextual points in this, and I was like, oh, I wonder, and I was like, oh, that could mean this, and it was always keeping my brain lit up watching what was going to happen next. And it's interesting that it's obviously shelled within sci-fi horror is the kind of the IMDb genre that it's been put under. Is it easier to tackle kind of weighty topics when they are shelled around specific genres, do you think? Like, why is it that sci-fi and horror lend itself kind of like Black Mirror-esque sci-fi dark avenues that people are probably afraid of in real life, but if we code it in a genre, people might not necessarily dig into it quite as deeply?
I think the answer is maybe different if you're talking about sci-fi and if you're talking about horror. Horror, obviously, I think it's a very healthy space to explore certain difficult emotions and an aspect of the human psychological spectrum that we might not want to explore in real life or aren't always faced with in real life. I think that's a healthy thing, and horror is a great genre to get there because it specifically targets those sort of emotions. With sci-fi, I think it's a lens that allows you to take the real world and kind of undo your habituation to it by skewing it slightly. So you're talking about the real world issues, but you're putting them in a slightly different context that makes you see them clearly. So, I mean, maybe there is a bit of a safe distance that you can get there. I don't think that's as important these days as it used to be. I mean, Star Trek, the original series, used to talk about heavy political issues secretly by putting it in the context of this sort of cheesy sci-fi world. I don't think we need to do that, but I think sci-fi is very useful because it lets us, bend the world in a way so that we can see it clearly again.
Tremendous. Brandon, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
It's time to find out what kind of a creature you really are.